Yes, sir. What's going on, guys? Welcome back to the Lopes Goes Last podcast. I, of course, am your host, Tyler Lopes. If you have not subscribed to the channel yet, please go ahead and do so. Also, please hit that like and share button so that everybody can enjoy these same videos together. And thank you so much for all the support that I've been getting over the last couple of weeks. I really love what we're doing over here. I think that we're going to start gathering momentum here very quickly. I'm putting out a lot of content here in short succession, so hopefully you guys have enjoyed. Today's episode is going to be a little bit shorter than I think it has been over the last couple of weeks. It's going to probably stay around an hour or so long. I guess that's about what it was last week, but regardless, it's going to be 2 segments long here. The first one's going to be doing what I do just about every single week, and that is going over the NFL Week 3 recap that I have been doing, where I kind of give a little snippet of what I think of each and every team and each and every game that happened for the past week. And I am starting a new segment. I'm going to let the past me actually talk about what it's going to be once we kind of get there. So hopefully you guys are excited. It is NBA related, so if you're into that, you are in for a treat. I really enjoyed it. Hopefully you guys do too. And with that, let's start this week's episode. Week 3 of the 2024 NFL season is in the books. Was not quite as weird as Week 2, but still entertaining nonetheless. So just like I had the first 2 weeks, I'm going to go over my quick thoughts for each team and each game. So here we go. Starting with Thursday Night Football, let's start with the Jets. The Jets needed this one pretty badly. Obviously, a good win in Tennessee last week, but you really needed to solidify your season at home against a bitter rival in the Patriots that has gotten the best of you for the last 20 years, basically, and they did just that. Aaron Rodgers had his best game, not only of the season, but possibly of the last 2 or 3 seasons, and so the Jets look like they are on their way to being a playoff team, and they may even compete to win this division if the Bills kind of start to fall off a little bit, which obviously they may, given their offensive talent level. But regardless, back to the Jets. They look like they will be just fine, that they may compete for a playoff spot. The only thing that I will say negative is Garrett Wilson and Aaron Rodgers do need to get more on the same page. Those two look like they were just a hair off for most of the game. They did have that touchdown connection, which was a perfect throw from Aaron Rodgers, but outside of that, they didn't look all that great. But good on the Jets. Meanwhile, on the Patriots side, the offensive line looks like if you were to have taken a bunch of kids from a community college, not even football players, just a bunch of kids, random guys, could be girls, could be whatever, and just threw them out there and said, you know what, go for it. I believe in you, kid. You can do it. Well, guess what? They can't do it. They're terrible. Please keep Drake May away from this absolute disaster of an offensive line for as long as humanly possible. Thank you so much. Moving on to the New York Football Giants. The Giants really needed this game. They have honestly not looked great this year at all. They really needed a game like this to kind of get their season off the ground. And man, it is really amazing how much a number one wide receiver, can do for you if you are just any football team. Because Malik Nabers has completely transformed this offense. Obviously, they looked absolutely atrocious in Week 1, but in Weeks 2 and Week 3, Malik Nabers has carried that offense, and he did so again in Week 3. Now, of course, he didn't carry it quite as much as he did in Week 2, and this time it obviously resulted in a win. Daniel Jones looked a little bit better, and the defense did just enough to have them win this game. So congratulations, New York Football Giants. You have one of the few positives that are going to happen for you this season. It's possible that the Giants actually did find some kind of formula where they could be successful long-term this season. Or it's possible that they were just playing the god-awful Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns may very well be the most inconsistent team in all of football and may be for the rest of the season. After a complete, awesome, put-it-all-together win where Deshaun Watson looked great against the Jaguars, immediately the next week they look absolutely terrible against a team that is arguably worse than the Jaguars. This is just another stark reminder that Deshaun Watson is being paid $240 million to be terrible. Moving on to the Malik Willis Bowl, let's start with the team Malik Willis plays for now, the Green Bay Packers. Malik Willis, he looked pretty good in this one. Didn't look special, didn't look fantastic, but was pretty good. And because the Titans defense didn't really play all that well, he didn't really have to be anything other than pretty good. And the Titans do have a phenomenal defense, so it was a little bit surprising to see them not play so great, but there's a lot of other factors that go into it. But regardless, Malik Willis didn't have to be incredible on Sunday. He just had to be good enough, and he was plenty good enough for the Packers to escape with a win. I know I said there are a lot of factors in the Titans losing this weekend and the fact that they have been losing. The main culprit is really Will Levis continues to turn the ball over. Another 3 turnovers on Sunday, including a pick 6 to Jair Alexander, which congratulations, Jair. One of the best DBs in football, and he finally gets his first career pick 6, so congrats to Jair. But regardless, if Will Levis continues to turn the ball over, it may not be much longer that they're going to continue to put him out there. They went with him as the starting quarterback last year. They traded Malik Willis away. They released Ryan Tannehill. So it is Will Levis. That is it. There is nobody else that is going to be really all that good for the Titans this year. But again, if he continues to play this poorly and waste a top 5 defense in the NFL, he's going to have a pretty short leash here soon if he doesn't turn things around. The defense only gave up 23 points this week, and the problem with that is, unless you give up 20 points or less, you have a 0% chance of winning with Will Levis at quarterback. That is what the Tennessee Titans are finding out. And if that continues to be the case, and he continues to just turn the ball over and give the other offense extra possessions over and over again, the Titans may go 0-17. They probably won't go 0-17, but they may, again, unless Will Levis or someone else turns that offense around and actually allows them to be competent, at least for a week or two. Moving on to the Bears and Colts, 2 very young, upstart, exciting quarterbacks. Let's start with your victors in that, the Indianapolis Colts. After a kind of not great week last week for the Colts, they bounced back nicely this week. Now, AR-15 didn't play all that great, but he played well enough to win against a really, really good defense. So good for the Colts. I do still think that they are going to be good enough to push for a playoff spot, but only time will tell if they can be consistent enough to get there. Oh, and shout out to the defense for the Colts, who had definitely had their most complete game of the season so far, and they are kind of solidifying themselves as maybe a sneaky top 10 defense in the NFL. The Bears' offense looked a little bit better this weekend, but unfortunately 3 more turnovers for Caleb Williams, and that pretty much derailed any momentum the Bears were trying to build during the game. For me, the most troubling aspect of the Bears right now, though, is the play of DeAndre Swift. 1.8 yards per carry for the first 3 weeks is nothing to really get super concerned about yet, because it's only 3 games, and some running backs do get off to slow starts, but it is a bit concerning. You paid $24 million, $8 million a year over 3 years for DeAndre Swift to be your bell cow running back, and 1.8 yards per carry is just not good enough. The defense is good enough. The offensive line, the running game, and even the passing game right now is not good enough, and they are wasting a good opportunity right now in Chicago unless they could turn things around. All right, one of the more intriguing games of the weekend, if not one of the more boring games, given its blowout nature. Vikings and Texans. Let's start with the victors, the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings honestly look like they may be the very best team in the NFL right now. And no, folks, I'm not joking. They really may be the best team in the NFL right now. Their resume so far, they've beaten 2 of the top teams in the NFL over the last 2 weeks, albeit the 49ers did have a lot of injuries, although the week that the Vikings played them, the only major injury was Christian McCaffrey to start the game, and they still were able to pull out the win. And then, of course, this week, they beat the Texans 34-7. This is a blowout of one of the favorites in the AFC to go to the Super Bowl, and so, honestly, right now, I don't see the Vikings slowing down. Sam Darnold looks every bit as good as I think he possibly could be given his circumstances, and honestly, I could not be happier for him. I was one of those guys that thought that Sam Darnold should have gone number 1 overall when he got drafted back in, I think, 2014, something like that. I don't remember exactly what year it was, but regardless, I am just so happy for Sam Darnold. I hope that this continues, but even if it all goes up in smoke tomorrow and he blows out both of his knees and this is all we ever get of Sam Darnold, I'm just happy that he got to taste being a successful quarterback for a few weeks, and I truly hope that his success continues, and who knows what happens maybe even next year in Minnesota if he keeps playing like this with J.J. McCarthy coming back. Who knows? But focusing on the now, I'm happy for Sam Darnold, and I hope his success continues. And for the Texans, honestly, I wouldn't really worry too much about this game. You ran into a kind of a buzzsaw. The Vikings are the best team in football right now, as I stated earlier, and you were undefeated going into this. It's just one of those things where you go on the road, you face a great team, and sometimes things just don't go your way. CJ Stroud didn't play great. The entire offense really didn't play great, and neither did the defense. It was just kind of a complete team collapse for one game, but these games are going to happen. You're most likely not going to go undefeated. That's just how things go. The only team that's ever done it in the regular season are the Dolphins and, of course, the Patriots back in 2007. So it's one of those things where, it's just probably not going to happen. And so if I'm the Texans, I shake this off, I brush it off. You go back next week and you beat the ever-living crap out of the Jaguars to get yourself back on track. And I hope they do, because they've got 6 weeks where they're playing a lot of really, really difficult defenses. They play the Lions, they play the Jets, they play the Patriots, they play the Packers. They play a lot of really, really good defenses over the next 6 weeks. So they really got to turn things around next week against a team that basically is just waiting to be put out of their misery. Moving on to the Philadelphia Eagles. After a tough loss to the Falcons last week at home, they bounced back nicely with a victory against the Saints here. Man, they must be thinking they're lucky stars that the Giants don't have any idea how to run a franchise and let Saquon Barkley go to a division rival, because Saquon is clearly their best player right now. I know he got some flack for dropping that ball on third down, but that shouldn't take away for the unbelievable start that Saquon has gotten off to this season, and also the complete way he has unlocked that offense as their bell cow running back. And that's the New Orleans Saints we all know and love. All of their offensive firepower completely evaporated in this one after getting off to such a hard start the first 2 weeks. Their breakout star in Rashid Shaheed had 0 catches for 0 yards and also 0 rushes for 0 yards. He was a complete and utter non-factor, and I mean that literally. Zeros across the board. And unfortunately, while their defense is playing fantastic, Derek Carr looked completely inept for the first time all season. Now, it's only week 3, and you've had 2 good weeks, so it's nothing to really get crazy scared about, but the Eagles' defense is a defense that can be exploited in the pass game, and the Saints just did not do that. But again, with how good the defense has been playing this year, if the offense is even slightly below average, they could be above 500 by the end of the season with how good their defense is. Steelers and Chargers, the battle of the mid-offenses, and we'll start with the Steelers. Okay, look, I'm very happy for Justin Fields. I am. I love Justin Fields. I'm an Ohio State fan. I was a big fan of Justin Fields coming out of the draft. I thought he was going to be the guy to break the Ohio State quarterback curse. Unfortunately, Chicago doesn't know what the heck they're doing. But I'm hoping that this season allows people to realize exactly how good Justin Fields actually is, because he's not playing fantastic, but obviously he is doing just enough for this team to win. But I will say, at least this game made sense. I always get upset that the Steelers win because they continue to be outgained yardage-wise, but they actually thoroughly outgained the Chargers in this one, and they just thoroughly outplayed the Chargers in this one. So I have no problem with this win because they deserved it. See? I'm a fair guy. Good job, Steelers. And like I said, the Chargers just got thoroughly outplayed. This was a rough one for them. They couldn't run, they couldn't pass, and surprisingly, a guy who's widely considered a top 10 quarterback in football in Justin Herbert could not pull them out of it at all. They don't really have the best weapons in the world on offense. Quentin Johnson is really their number 1, which is terrifying. But regardless, you would expect a guy like that to, if the running game's not working like it had been the last couple of weeks, to be able to claw their team out of it with his arm, because he's talented enough to do that, and it just didn't happen. So I'm starting to wonder if there's sort of handcuffs on him right now offensively, with Jim Harbaugh being his head coach. So I don't know, maybe those handcuffs come off at some point, but honestly, I don't know if it's going to happen. But that's just me speculating. Honestly, I think the Chargers are going to be just fine. They're going to compete for a playoff spot this year, most likely, and their defense is fairly good. So I think that they actually have a shot to be pretty good this year, but time will tell. Denver Broncos. Okay. So you just beat the Bucs by double digits on the road. Huh? Bucks, what happened? This is the same team. This is the same team that just beat the Lions, who I said was going to be the number one seed in the NFL. They were going to have the best record in the NFL this year. You just beat the Lions, and then you immediately turn around and lose by 19 points at home to the Denver Broncos. Honestly, this is just another example that sometimes football just makes no sense. The passing game was completely irrelevant. Baker Mayfield was sacked 9 times and threw for 4.9 yards per completion. There was absolutely no downfield threat whatsoever. The Broncos did whatever they wanted, and that's pretty much it. Part of me kind of wants to just throw this away, like I said for the Texans earlier, losing to the Vikings, but this is a bit different in that you lost to the Broncos. The Broncos. But it is just one game. You're probably fine if you're the Bucs, but this has got to be a little bit disheartening at the very least. All right, moving on from Battle of the Mid with the Steelers and the Chargers to Battle of the Basement, Panthers and Raiders. Let's start with the Panthers. Man, you got to be kidding me, Panthers. So the Panthers, they got a huge win. They scored 36 points, which is more points than they'd scored the entire first 2 weeks combined. This has to be the worst case scenario if you are Bryce Young. I literally cannot come up with a worst case scenario, football-wise, than what happened on Sunday for Bryce Young. I know that all of the Bryce Young stands out there, if there are any left, were probably hoping that Andy Dalton would go out there and be just as bad as Bryce Young has been, because that would, in a weird kind of transition property way, prove that it was not Bryce Young's fault that they were bad. But that's not only not what happened, the complete opposite happened, where Andy Dalton went out there and played better than he has in years in the exact same offense that Bryce Young has been told to run for the last 2 years. And at this point, I know it's just 1 week, but if Andy Dalton does this, or at least something resembling not terribleness at quarterback, Bryce Young may not see the field. And if that does happen, Dalton may have 2 or 3 weeks in a row where he's not great. And then they may go with Bryce Young at that point. But at this point, I've seen enough to where unless Andy Dalton has 2 to 3 weeks, maybe even 4 straight weeks of terrible, Bryce Young will not see the field for the rest of this season. And then after that, and the Raiders. So, you beat the number 1 seed from last week. That's who you beat. You beat the Ravens last week. So, one of the best teams in the NFL, number 1 seed in the playoffs last year. You beat those guys last week. And then this week, you lost to the 32nd seed, so the worst team in the NFL by a lot this week. Okay, Raiders. Yep, you're the Raiders. That's for sure. All right, another blowout here, unfortunately. The Seahawks and Dolphins. Let's start with the Seahawks. A 3-0 start for the Seahawks, albeit against not so great competition at this point. But I will say, for all those folks out there who said that they would only win 5, maybe 6 games, you guys must be feeling pretty crummy right now, given their 3-0 start. Again, albeit against not great competition. And as you can tell, I was not one of those people that thought that. They have 3 legit weapons on offense that could be number 1s on most other teams in the NFL. And they have a much more aggressive defense this year than they have in the past. And so I actually think that they could sustain a reasonable level of success this year where they could win 10 or 11 games. And at this rate, that may be good enough to win the division because of all of the myriad of injuries that everybody else in their division has been suffering over the last couple of weeks with the 49ers and the Rams specifically. And yeah, the Miami Dolphins just look like a team that has absolutely no heart anymore, and honestly, I don't really blame them considering what happened to Tua. Now, I know, quarterbacks get injured all the time, but this wasn't just an injury. There was immediate talks that the guy who was supposed to lead them to a Super Bowl, the highest paid quarterback in franchise history, yada, 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 and by the way, just a guy that everybody loved on that team, he may never play football again. That's a lot different than, just losing your quarterback for a certain number of weeks. This is a man whose livelihood and thing that he loves the most outside of his family is possibly taken away from him for good. That is really, really disheartening, and I don't blame these guys if they feel like their season's been taken away from them and the soul and life has been sucked out of that locker room. I honestly would not blame them. Plus, once again, moving on from the just the tragedy of the Tua stuff, their defense is really, really bad. Like, I said this at the beginning of the season that their defense was going to take a huge step back, and it has. Obviously, they still have good pieces, Javon Holland, Jalen Ramsey, just to name a couple, but right now, their front seven looks abysmal, and that's where they lost a lot of their talent, and guess what? They aren't as good as they were, and that makes perfect sense to me. They may have a worse record than the Patriots at the end of the season if Tua doesn't come back. I don't know, which would be a crime shame given how potent their offense is. This was a very fun game. Ravens and Cowboys. Let's start with the Ravens. A much needed win. I would argue that no team needed to win more this past weekend than the Ravens, other than maybe the Jets, just because of what the Patriots kind of do to them on a regular basis and the fact that it was their first game at home. But I would still argue Ravens probably needed it a little bit more, considering they were 0-2 and the Jets were not. So this is a good win for them on the road, and hopefully this is going to get them a little bit more back on track in terms of, where their season's going to be going towards. Obviously, their division is not that great. The Steelers are 3-0, but everybody else is pretty bad right now. So they still have a really good shot of winning the division, and I do think that they will eventually catch up to the Steelers once the Steelers start playing a little bit better competition on a regular basis. And of course, the Ravens will have two opportunities to actually beat the Steelers themselves, which I think that they will twice. So we'll see where they eventually land, but I don't see any reason why the Ravens won't be one of the best teams in the AFC when the year is over, as long as they can catch up to the Steelers and actually beat them when they play each other. And as for the Cowboys, 274 yards and 3 touchdowns on the ground? Really? Is that honestly the best that you can do? I picked Micah Parsons to be the Defensive Player of the Year this year, and honestly, he has been a complete non-factor through 3 games. Now, of course, it's not all his fault. He's getting double and triple teamed pretty much every play, and the reason is because they have nobody else on that defensive line that's actually good at pass rushing this year for some reason. He did actually get the singular quarterback hit last week for the Cowboys, so I guess I can't be too mad at Micah Parsons, but right now their pass rush is completely and utterly irrelevant, and I'm not really sure how the Cowboys fix it. They don't have a lot of money to go out and just sign guys or trade for guys or anything like that. Maybe you could buy low on somebody that, is on a really terrible team that they're just trying to sell. But I think that they should have gone out and got Matt Judon. That was the team that I was actually thinking should do that. But of course, it ended up being the Falcons. But regardless, I said this at the beginning. I don't know how the Cowboys think they're going to make the playoffs this year. They are just not good enough. They're not making the playoffs. Battle of the NFC West, Rams and 49ers. Let's start with the Rams. I said last week I was worried that the Rams are going to go 0-5, 0-6, once Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua come back, but they faced a team that had just about equal opportunity in terms of injury bug, right? Or not opportunity, I would say just equal terribleness in the 49ers this week, and so they were able to pull out a win. And man, every time I watch Matthew Stafford, I respect that man more and more and more. He just has this patient leadership about him where he doesn't really get too fired up with things. He doesn't really, get on to guys if they make a lot of mistakes, especially right now when you're playing your 3rd, 4th, 5th, maybe even 6th best wide receiver on your depth chart because you have so many injuries. You're playing a backup tight end, and you could just see him be so calm all the time. Now, sometimes you do need that rah-rah guy, but I just love watching Matthew Stafford play football, and again, the more I watch him, I just have more and more respect for him every single time. I honestly wish I had that kind of temperament, but that's one of the many reasons why he is in the NFL and I am behind a screen talking about it. 49ers are really struggling right now. They have been bit with the injury bug about as bad as anybody in the NFL outside of, again, maybe the team that they just played with the Rams. And there's an argument to actually be made that they do have it worse than just about everybody else. They are down their top 3, arguably, offensive options in Deebo Samuel, Christian McCaffrey, and George Kittle. I said last week, at least they have George Kittle. Apparently George Kittle got hurt in their last game too, because he didn't play this weekend either. They also have a host of other injuries on their defensive side of the football, for instance, Dre Greenlaw being one of them. So there's a lot of different injuries that the 49ers are going through. This was still a winnable game for them because, again, the only team that's kind of in that conversation for injuries that I can think of right now is the Rams, and yet the 49ers still could not pull this one out. I hope that they get healthy soon. I hope they both, the Rams and the 49ers, honestly, get healthy very soon, because these are two really good teams in that NFC West and just in the NFC in general, and I'd like to see the best teams be in the playoffs. And I don't know if they can't get their weapons back, especially the 49ers, how they survive this year. Lions, Cardinals are up next. Let's start with the Lions. A nice bounce-back win for them after a tough loss against Tampa Bay, who lost again to the Broncos. This weekend. I'll get over it. I swear I will. The ground game really carried them in this one, and I'm gonna say something that probably is gonna be a bit unpopular. I don't really hear anybody else talking about it, so just kind of keep it between us here. I'm starting to get a little bit worried about Jared Goff. Look, I know he's probably going to be fine, but he hasn't looked the greatest to start this season. He's got more interceptions than touchdowns. He's got the best offensive line in all of football, in my personal opinion. He's got 2 great running backs. He's got minimum 2 really good wide receivers, and the tight end that broke like all of the rookie records last season. He's got plenty of opportunity and options to go to be great. But he just hasn't played well. And this may be just like a little bit of PTSD talking, but I've seen enough bad Jared Goff football to be worried that he's just going to go back to that bad football. He'll probably be fine. I recognize that he will probably be fine. And I'm probably just having that PTSD get to me. But it is there. And I'm starting to get a little worried about it. Despite this loss, the Arizona Cardinals looked pretty okay in this one. They honestly just couldn't run the ball. That was their fatal flaw. And yeah, maybe you could say, well, they couldn't run the ball, so they didn't look all that good. Fair play. But they didn't look too bad in this one. Their defense played pretty well. Kyler Murray looked decent in this one as well. So, they played a really, really good team, too. We can't forget that. They played the Detroit Lions, who, again, I think had the best team in the NFL coming into the season. So for me, I'm not really too worried about this one. They played them tough, and again, I'm not going to get too down if I'm Arizona for losing to the Lions. Alrighty, folks, here goes nothing. Another Kansas City Chiefs win and another ref controversy. Yay! Honestly, it's starting to get really annoying to talk about this because I feel like we've been talking about it for 3 years, but the Kansas City Chiefs just basically get every call ever, and it's really starting to bug a lot of people, including me. This isn't the only reason that the Falcons ended up losing this game, or vice versa, that the Chiefs ended up winning this game, but a ball to Kyle Pitts in the end zone, there was clear defensive pass interference. I don't remember who was covering Kyle Pitts. I think it was one of the backers. It might have been Nick Bolton. I don't remember, but it was clear pass interference. Like, not even remotely close. There's a still image of the ball about 30 feet away from Kyle Pitts as he's reaching for it, and he's literally getting tackled in the end zone with the ball 30 feet away, and yet no call. So last week, there was pass interference for the Chiefs, on their last drive that ended up having them win the game. And then this time, they're on defense, and they don't get a very clearly similar call. It's starting to get ridiculous. However, the Falcons did go for a 4th and 1 and had one of the worst play calls I've ever seen in my life on a 4th and 1 to lose the game. So it wasn't all on the refs, clearly, but again, I'm saying this again, that the refs helped the Chiefs win a game down the stretch on the last or second to last drive of the game, and it's really, really starting to bug me. As for the Falcons, again, they definitely should have won this game. I watched a good portion of it. I didn't end up watching all of it, but I watched a good portion of it, and the portions that I saw, the Falcons thoroughly outplayed the Chiefs. Now, then again, I may not have just gotten the full picture, but regardless, I think the Falcons had a better game than the Chiefs did. I think they outplayed them, but when you're playing against the Chiefs and the refs, it's kind of hard for you to win if you make any mistakes. Well, this game was a disaster. Let's start with the Bills. Pure, utter domination by the Bills. They basically played a college team out there this weekend. They did everything well, and if they keep playing like this, if they put everything together like they did this week consistently, then they could make a Super Bowl run this year. That's how well they played. But, again, it was against the Jaguars, so I'm not really sure that it actually will be sustainable. All right, it's officially disaster time in Jacksonville. Trevor Lawrence absolutely stinks right now. He stunk for the first 2 weeks, and he stunk again this week. He had one of the worst interceptions that I have ever seen, and definitely maybe the second worst interception this year, because that Will Levis pick in week 1 was just hilariously bad. But he overthrew his receiver by about 19 yards on like an in, I think, or a crosser route or something, where he literally just fired it like as it, like say the guy was running a 10-yard in, right? He threw it as if he was running an 18-yard in or a 20-yard in. Like he just bombed it over his head to a defensive back that was like 20 yards downfield from where his nearest receiver was. Terrible, terrible throw. If you haven't seen the video of it, you should go look it up. It's pretty bad. And at this point, you probably do have to consider benching Trevor Lawrence for Mac Jones, which, honestly, in football terms, that is a fate worse than death. Oh, and their defense looked absolutely terrible in this one as well. So that doesn't help either. But when your offense is super terrible and your defense plays super terrible, guess what? You lose by 30 plus. It's a Jane Daniels party. It's a Commanders party. It just doesn't have a good ring to it. A coming out party for the Washington Commanders and specifically Jaden Daniels. He looked sensational. If you look at the statistics of it, it's not like it just jumps out. It's not like he threw for 400 yards and ran for 150 or something, but he was in complete control. Only 2 incompletions and 3 total touchdowns. So more total touchdowns than he had incompletions in this one. He looked like he was in complete control of the offense from start to finish. And honestly, he looked like he was in complete control of the game from start to finish. And I think other than maybe Malik Neighbors, I would say Jaden Daniels is the favorite for Rookie of the Year right now. This loss for the Cincinnati Bengals is solely on the defense. They played absolutely terrible. I mean, watching that, it looked like they just had no idea how to cover any of the weapons that the Commanders have. And listen, I love Scary Terry. He's one of the best receivers in the NFL, and he's so underrated because he's played for a team that's historically been terrible. But it's not like they have an offense that like is going to break worlds, right? Like they have an average offense, I would say, in terms of the totality of weapons that they put together, especially after they traded a few guys from their offense this season to actually get worse. But anyways, the Commanders looked great. The Bengals didn't know what to do on defense. And I've actually heard people on Twitter and on some, radio shows and talk shows say that Joe Burrow let his team down this weekend and he was the reason or one of the main reasons for their loss. I don't really know how anybody can come to that conclusion. So he's only the second quarterback this year to have a game where he throws for over 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. They didn't punt the entire game. The offense literally scored every single possession that they had the ball. And Joe Burrow did not turn the football over. And they scored 33 points. But somehow Joe Burrow is the reason that they lost the game? I'm sorry, next argument, because that one makes absolutely no sense to me. So I've been wanting to change some things up on the channel for quite a while now, and I've been doing some digging, doing some thinking, kind of figuring out what I want to do, and I figured out something that I want to do, and I honestly thought about doing it around a year ago, and I just never ended up getting to it because basketball season was just so crazy, and I just never had time to kind of do any of this in the previous off season, so I ended up scrapping it, but we are going to try and do it this week, next week, and the week after, just to kind of see, where it goes, and we'll go from there. So this segment is going to be called Reload, Retool, or rebuild. Now, what that means is I am going to take an NBA team that I think is kind of in a bit of purgatory right now. So somebody that's not one of the top 3 to 4 seeds in the East, and not somebody that's in the top 3 to 4 seeds in the West, but also a team that's not the bottom 4 in the East, and not the bottom 4 in the West. I'm going to take one of those teams that I think is somewhere in that middle range, kind of, again, in purgatory, and I am going to go over their roster. I'm going to go over their financial situation. I'm going to go over 3 pros and 3 cons as to, what pertains to their individual team and their situation for this upcoming season. And then at the end, I'm going to give my doctor's diagnosis as to whether they should reload, which means that they should run it back the same exact way this year, and maybe things will improve, whether it was because things are, we're looking at injury or whatever the case may be, kind of similar to what the Memphis Grizzlies were last year. Memphis is not going to be one of these teams, by the way, that I'll be doing. Whether they should retool, which is maybe they should mostly run it back, but maybe swap out a couple pieces for some other pieces, maybe let one guy go in free agency and replace him with another, similar to what the 76ers did this offseason, or should they rebuild, blow it up completely, start all over? Because you guys are not going to win a championship. You should just be as bad as you can next year to try and save some draft capital and get some young talent into your roster. Don't really have a last year comparison to that, I guess, off the top of my head. The Wizards, I guess. I don't know. They didn't really they blew it up the offseason. I guess that does qualify. The Wizards, yeah, we'll say the Wizards. Again, none of those 3 teams will be being featured in this series, so it's fine to use those as examples. So that's kind of how the series is going to go. Let's just jump right into it here. So, as for the roster, so here is the roster for the Phoenix Suns. We'll start with the point guards. Devin Booker, obviously one of the best players in the NBA. He was one of the featured superstars on the Olympic roster for this season, and there's a reason for that. He's absolutely wonderful. Not necessarily a pure point guard, but he typically ran the point for them last year, so I am going to count him as a point guard in this circumstance. He could obviously just be qualified as a shooting guard, but we're going to call him a point guard just for simplicity's sake. Tyus Jones, brought him in on a minimum contract this year, one of my favorite signings of the offseason. He is a really, really good offensive player. He's capable of scoring 20 points a night if you give him enough kind of run with the ball. I believe he was on the Wizards, ironically enough, last year, and he did well over there. He was previously on the Grizzlies, and obviously they loved him over there in Memphis. And then Monte Morris, good veteran presence, good backup point guard should Devin Booker or Tyus Jones go down with injury. Not anything special at this point in his career, but certainly going to be somebody that can help out. On to the shooting guards. So this is a pretty good group here. So Bradley Beal, I think he really played more of the 3 last year, but again, he's qualified and kind of, always been looked at as the 2 on the Wizards, and then obviously last year with the Suns as well. So I'm going to look at him as more of a 2 here, just for the sake of this depth chart here. But he may play the 3 very well this year, similar to what he did last year. So Bradley Beal, it's tough to really talk about Bradley Beal at this point in his career. He's not had a lot of playoff success. Last year, there was a lot of expectations on his shoulders, and he said all the right things. He said that he was excited about going to the playoffs. He's been chomping at the bit, and none of the regular season matters. He said all the right things. When it came down to it, though, he just wasn't very good, and that's kind of been the story of his career so far in the playoffs. He just hasn't been very good. Grayson Allen, huge breakout season. I don't have his exact statistics pulled up here, but all I know is that he was statistically the best three-point shooter in the NBA in terms of percentage last year. And he probably chucked up a good 6 or 8 a game. So it's not like he was getting no shots up. This was a guy that, was hitting, 2 to 3 threes per game consistently last season on not super high volume either. It's not like he's taking 15 to 20 shots a game. He's taking, those threes are really the only shots that he's getting outside of a couple layups or middies, here and there. So he's only getting about 10 shots a game. total. So it's not like he's this is a guy that they could give the ball more to and probably be okay, at least if he stays as efficient as he was last year. And Damian Lee, kind of similar to Monte Morris, albeit a little bit worse. I'd say Monte Morris is more likely to have a bigger impact with more minutes than Damian Lee is, but, a veteran presence on the bench, not a bad guy to have as a backup should there be any kind of injury. May get some minutes, not really sure, but, they can count on him in case somebody gets hurt. The 3 position, 2 new faces to the franchise here. Josh Okogie, I believe, was signed this offseason. I could be wrong. Maybe he did play for them last season, but pretty... I don't know what the word I'm trying to use is, but nondescript, didn't really stand out season last year. So, not much to talk about here. He's probably going to come off the bench. I highly doubt that he's going to start. And then there is the first-round rookie Ryan Dunn. They drafted him out of Virginia this year with their first-round pick. I liked him a lot. If you guys go back and watch the video where I talked about the guys that I wanted the Celtics to draft at number 30 or 32 or whatever pick they had, I don't remember. I guess it was 30. Ryan Dunn was the number 1 guy that I was hoping would be there. I did not think he was going to be there, and he was not. So, I liked him a lot. He's very versatile defensively, and so I think that if he's given some run and he can kind of develop a bit offensively, I actually think that he could help the Phoenix Suns out quite a bit this year. We'll see if that happens. But again, I don't think either of these guys are going to end up starting. I think both of them are going to come off the bench because most likely, I think you're going to probably start Tyus Jones at the 1, and you're probably going to put Booker to the 2, Beal to the 3, and then of course KD at the 4. So that is nobody's moving him. He is right there, and that's the way it's going to be. As long as Kevin Durant is healthy, he is either the 1A, the 1B, whatever he is for this team. He is very important. Obviously, they gave up a ton for him. He had a great Olympics, kind of a resurgent Olympics for him, and he just did a great job. He was one of the best players on the team because he's Kevin Durant, so it makes sense. And then Royce O'Neal, nice piece that they got from Brooklyn last year. He is a guy that's, again, pretty versatile. Can play the 3, can play the 4, can guard the 2 through 4, pretty well. Not a superb defender by any means, but a good 3-point shooter and a guy that can hold his own in the defensive end. So he's a nice bench piece for them. That I think will be important, especially if there's some injuries, which are always a possibility for everyone. And then at the center position, probably the deepest position on the team. So you got Jusuf Nurkic, who had a great year last year. He really found his kind of rebounding passion, not necessarily passion, but you guys know what I mean. Last year, he had a great rebounding season, was pretty efficient on the offensive end as well. He's never been a phenomenal interior defender, so I'm not really expecting that out of him, but he was a bit better on that end as well last year. Bol is classified as a center. I'm more looking at him as a 4, I would say. But, again, as a backup center, I think that's fine. He's obviously got the height for it. A guy that, is very exciting. Everybody loves to watch Bol play every time he does, but he's just a defensive liability. That's really what his problem is. He's great offensively, but defensively he's putrid. And he's just very skinny, so he doesn't have a lot of strength to kind of hold guys off in the interior, so he tends to struggle. And then Mason Plumlee, again, kind of similar to Morris, a veteran presence that you don't have any problems with going towards on the bench. If he needs to play 10 minutes a night, I don't think anybody is going to be too mad at that. Not going to do anything spectacular. Not really a guy that you can expect to get 8 boards and 8 rebounds in 10 minutes. Although I guess he could, but, it's pretty unlikely. But, he's a guy that's a good veteran presence. He knows his way around, and he'll do just fine for you. And then last but not least, we'll talk about the two-way guys. Obviously, I know a little bit less about these guys than I would the guys on the kind of main roster, if you will, the NBA roster, if you will. Ty Washington, I'm actually a big fan of. I think that he has some good potential. Just hasn't really, panned out. I think he was drafted by I want to say he was drafted by the Thunder and then traded to Houston, or maybe he was just drafted by Houston, but he was on the Houston roster for a little while, and then last year he was with the Bucks. May have had a stop in between there, I don't remember, but obviously now he's made his way over to Phoenix. See if he can kind of revive something. He's got a ways to go, for sure, and on this roster in particular, I'm going to find it hard to believe that he's going to play any kind of role for them this year, barring catastrophic injury to multiple players at multiple positions, because you obviously got Devin Booker, who's played mostly the 1 last year, and then even if he moves to the 2, Tyus Jones is a guy that can play 35 minutes a night for you, and then Monte Morris is a good veteran backup. Grayson Allen can play the 1 a little bit. Damian Lee maybe can play the 1 a little bit, and so yeah, I just don't see Ty Washington really having much impact on the roster this year, but I did want to mention him. Same with Connor Gillespie. He's only 6'1", so I don't know much about him, but I'm assuming he classifies as a 1. If he doesn't, he's a very undersized 2. Regardless of that, whichever he is, he's not really probably going to have much of an impact on the main roster this year, or on the NBA roster, I should say, barring, again, catastrophic injuries to multiple players. And then Jalen Bridges, to be honest, I just don't know anything about Jalen Bridges, but this is a guy that you just never know. I mean, there's not a whole lot of wing depth. If he shows out in the G League, then maybe he will get a chance, and he could be a young guy that comes in up and steps in. I don't know. I don't know much about him. I'm sure he's a lovely man. I just, again, do not know much about Jalen Bridges, but if he ends up, doing well, then, maybe he could be a nice young piece for them in the future. But that is kind of the breakdown of the roster here. Now, I would like to go over, like I said, 3 pros and 3 cons, but before I get into that, I will say just a little blurb about the financial situation for these guys. I will get more into this later on in the video, but I will be doing this as kind of part of the standard procedure for this kind of segment, right? So, looking at their finances, they are about $93 million, give or take, over that first initial apron, and I don't remember how much they're over the second apron, but they are in the second apron. So what that means, and again, we'll get more into this, is they are very limited financially in terms of signings, in terms of trades, in terms of draft picks, in terms of a lot of different stuff. So they are in a tough spot financially, not just this year, but in the following years, with Beal and Booker and Durant and Nurkic all kind of signed to long-term contracts. But yeah, so that's pretty much it about the finances. We will get into this a little bit later on. Now let's move on to those 3 pros and 3 cons. Right, let's start with the pros. So the first and obvious pro of the Phoenix Suns in terms of their team this year is they have a ton of talent offensively. Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, those guys speak for themselves. These guys are all NBA caliber players. 2 of them, in Booker and Durant, are first team All-NBA caliber players if they are both healthy and if they are both engaged and ready to go. These guys could very easily both make the first team All-NBA for this upcoming season at their positions. There's an argument to be made that Devin Booker is the best 2 guard in the entire league. I don't know if he is because Jaylen Brown, because Anthony Edwards, because Donovan Mitchell. There's certainly other guys that are kind of nipping at his heels, but if I had to pick right now today, I would still pick Devin Booker to be the number 1 2 guard. Now, obviously, I think at this point, Luka is considered a 1, and so I consider him a point guard. So that would be the only other guy that I would throw in there, depending on how you kind of define Luka and Kyrie there. But regardless, Devin Booker is regardless a very, very good player that could be first team All-NBA. And then Kevin Durant, his resume speaks for itself. If he is healthy, he is going to score 25 or more points a game. That's just how it's going to go. Last year, he struggled a bit more than he usually does, even though he was healthy for most of the season. But at the same time, the whole team kind of was in turmoil last year, so I don't know if I'm necessarily going to hold Kevin Durant super accountable for his struggles if everybody else was also struggling outside of Grayson Allen. So yeah, that's really it. But Kevin Durant, he speaks for himself. And then Bradley Beal is a guy that we know can score 30 points a night if you let him. He's a guy that can get super hot, and if he goes off and everybody else is kind of scoring as well, then it's a tough night. They have so much offensive firepower that some teams just aren't going to be able to beat them just based off a math problem, right? Like, they just have too many guys to guard. And then even outside of those guys, you've got Tyus Jones, right, who can score 20 points a night if you let him. So this is a guy that really that he could be a microwave for you. He can run the offense. He can get a bunch of assists. He can help get guys open. And that's something that you were missing last year if you're the Phoenix Suns. He is a very, very important piece for you this year, and I hope that he gets used to his full potential. And then obviously you have Nurkic, who is pretty decent and efficient offensively. It's not like he's going to shoot a bunch of threes, although he did shoot some threes last year, I saw, which kind of surprised me. But hey, it's a good evolution for him if he can figure out a way to step back and shoot some threes. Royce O'Neal is a good three-point shooter off the bench. Obviously, I talked about Grayson Allen earlier being the best three-point shooter in the NBA. And so, there's some guys that can kind of play offensively on this team. There's a lot of firepower, and there's not a lot of offensive weaknesses on this team. And then Bol, too, is a guy that when he's on the floor, he's really good offensively, too. He can do just about everything. So, there's a lot of weapons, and it's going to be hard to guard them if you're any opposing defense as long as they are fully healthy. All right, second pro for the Phoenix Suns is their bench depth. I obviously talked about all the talent that they have offensively in their starting lineup and off their bench, and that kind of goes along with this, is they have a lot of depth on their bench, and not a lot of other teams can say that. Look at the 76ers, for example. Their starting lineup is great, but I question what they are going to get off of their bench. They kind of sent a lot of their really good bench talent away to other teams via trades and just let them go in free agency over the last couple of years. I question what kind of production they are going to get off of their bench. That's just one example, right? But the Phoenix Suns don't really have that problem. They actually have guys that can come in and play big minutes, 20 to 25, maybe even 30 minutes a night, and you're not going to feel too bad about it. I mean, a guy like, Grayson Allen, that is a good defender, or at the very least an average defender, right, in the NBA, and a good three-point shooter. You feel good about playing him a bunch of minutes if, say, Devin Booker or Bradley Beal need a rest, or they get injured and are sitting out a day. You don't feel too bad about Grayson Allen coming in there. Same with Royce O'Neal, right? And same with, a guy like Bol. Yes, he's not great defensively, but he's a guy that can, at the very least, pick up some offensive slack for you if somebody were to go down. And then, of course, you've got somebody like Josh Okogie, who is a bit inefficient offensively, but a guy who's a vet that can step in. He's, 26, 27 years old, has been around for a few years. You trust a guy like that to come in off the bench and kind of get the job done for you. So they have a lot of depth on the bench that I really like, and I think that if they do go through kind of an injury bug, they can, at the very least, kind of hover at that 500 range while they are out, unless, of course, they just lose everybody. If they lose everybody, then obviously they're not going to be very good, like the Memphis Grizzlies last year. They had a lot of depth. They just literally lost all of their depth. Like, everybody got injured. I think they were breaking, records and stuff like that for how many people were injured and how many minutes, were played by guys in the G League, and it was just a whole mess for the Grizzlies. So let's hope that doesn't happen to anybody this year. That would be terrible. But yeah, unless you lose a bunch of guys, if you lose one or two guys at a time, if you're Phoenix, then you feel pretty good about your bench being able to come in and get the job done. All right, the third pro for the Phoenix Suns is their reliance on veterans and the amount of veterans that they have on their roster. Now, this can be a con, depending on your way of looking at it, but for me, it is a pro. Oftentimes, teams will have to rely on rookies or really young players to step up and be great. A team like the Celtics, for instance, has the opposite problem, and kind of similar to the Phoenix Suns here, although in a different way, in that now the Celtics have a lot of veteran depth. They've got, some younger guys like 25, 26 years old that are, not super old or anything like that, but, they've been in the league for a few years that they're now relying on. I am sifting through the rotation for the Boston Celtics in my head right now, and there is not a single guy that is a rookie or a second year that is going to play a hugely prominent role on that team. And that is a good thing, because oftentimes rookies are a roll of the dice, a flip of a coin. You never know what you're going to get, not only on a night-to-night basis, but just in their career. Yeah, if you've got the number 1 pick in the draft and you're going to rely on him, that makes a little bit more sense. If you got the number 2 pick, that makes a little bit more sense that you're going to rely a little heavier on them at first. But for a team like the Suns that are drafting in the low to mid to late 20s every year, do you want Ryan Dunn? And no offense to Ryan Dunn, I already sang his high praises. I like him. I think he's going to be a great NBA player. Do you want to rely on him to kind of carry the load for you? Not really. Because if you do, then you're risking just being really bad because he doesn't know his way around the NBA yet. Sure, he could be really good like Donovan Mitchell was several years ago, where he just stepped right in to a pretty bad Utah team and kind of turned that whole franchise around and made him a playoff team pretty instantly. Sure, you could get that out of a guy that was drafted in the 20s, but that's rare. That doesn't happen very often. And so having a lot of veterans that you can rely on, you know what you're going to get out of them on a night-to-night basis, or at least you have a better idea of what you're going to get out of them on a night-to-night basis. It's not always perfect, but I think that they have a better chance of kind of getting through the regular season, not getting too high, not getting too low, and, being able to get into the playoffs and maybe do some damage. So that's kind of the way I'm looking at it. Certainly, it can be a con if you are overly reliant on, a ton of veterans and you're kind of holding a bunch of your young guys down, a la the Warriors for the last 2 seasons or so, where, their young guard and Moses Moody and Jonathan Kuminga and all these guys are like, hey, we want more kind of responsibility on this team, and the veterans are like, no, it's our team still, and they're still holding on, and the veterans are playing, and they're not playing well, and or at least some of them, not all of them. Obviously, Curry is still fantastic, but you guys get my point, right? So it could certainly be a con, but I think for the Phoenix Suns, it's actually going to be a big pro for them this year. I think it's going to allow them to really succeed, but with these cons that are coming up, we'll see how successful they're even going to be. All right, I talked about their pros. Now it's time to get into their cons. The first con, and I honest to goodness think that this is a con that may make or break the Phoenix Suns this year. Literally, it is one word: defense. Their defense stinks. It stunk last year, and I see nothing that they have done this offseason to make me think it's not going to stink this year. Let's go with a lineup, which I think the most likely starting lineup for the Phoenix Suns this year is going to be Tyus Jones at the 1, Devin Booker at the 2, Bradley Beal at the 3, Kevin Durant at the 4, Yusuf Nurkic at the 5. Now, you could go Booker at the 1, Allen at the 2, Beal at the 3, Durant at the 4, Nurkic at the 5. But let's stick to the first one, and then I'll talk about the second one. If you go with the first one with Tyus Jones starting, then Booker, then Beal, then Durant, then Nurkic, you have 4 below-average defenders on your team right then and there. Nurkic is below average for his position. Beal is way below average for his position. Booker is below average for his position, and Jones is below average for his position. And you have Kevin Durant, who has been a good defender in his career, but at this point in his career, do you really want Kevin Durant being your best defender? That scares me quite a bit. I don't think that Kevin Durant has it in him to be guarding athletic wings on a night-to-night basis or guarding your other team's number 1 on a night-to-night basis. I don't love that for the Phoenix Suns. So, if that's your lineup, you're in deep trouble because you do not have any plus defenders, and all those guys are going to be playing 30 minutes a night or more. So that's scary. But let's say you go with the second lineup. You go Booker at the 1, Allen at the 2, Beal at the 3, Durant at the 4, Nurkic at the 5, which I would say was the consensus starting lineup for them last year for the most part. Well, last year their defense was atrocious, first of all, but second of all, okay, fine. Grayson Allen is a decent defender at his position. I will give you that, but it still means you are starting 4 below average defenders on your team. Okay, 3, maybe not Durant. That's still not good. And plus, we've seen this lineup now. It's not good defensively. Yes, I love that they brought in Tyus Jones. They needed to bring in a point guard that's going to help distribute the ball. But he's a bad defender. Very, very bad defender. Way below average at defense. And factor in this. The age of their players is not getting any younger. I said earlier the veteran part of their team is going to help them, and I do think it will. But where it could hurt is as your guys continue to get older, as Beal continues to get 1 year older, Nurkic continues to get 1 year older, Durant continues to get 1 year older, so on and so forth. Guess what? Your defense doesn't get better as you age. It gets worse because your athleticism starts to drop. And especially for guys like Tyus Jones, like Kevin Durant, like Devin Booker, they are needed to carry the offense. And so if you are needed to carry the offense, your defense sometimes can slip unless you are on a very, very disciplined team that does not allow that to happen, that everybody's a two-way guy. That really only exists in Boston right now, to be honest, maybe in Minnesota as well. So we will see how that goes for Phoenix, but I don't see any reason to why they may not still be the worst defense in the entire NBA. That could single-handedly destroy their hopes. Sure, this team has a lot of offensive firepower, and they could score 130 points a night, but if they're giving up 132 points a night, it's not going to matter. Another con, and this is a big one that reared its ugly head last year. They were the absolute worst fourth quarter team in the NBA, and it was not even close. Now, what does that mean? That means that their point differential in the fourth quarter for the regular season was somewhere around minus 13 points per fourth quarter, which means they were getting outscored by an average of 13 points in the fourth quarter just about the entire season. Now, I didn't look by the end of the season. It may have been a little bit better than that by the end of the year. I'm not sure. But for the most part, they were getting outscored for the entirety of the year in the fourth quarter. Now, obviously, they still ended up being the 6th seed, so it's not like it killed their playoff hopes or anything, but it's a bad omen. Now, do I think that there could be some regression to the mean? Absolutely. Would I think that a team with Devin Booker, Bradley Beal, Kevin Durant, Tyus Jones, all these offensive weapons on their team could get better in the fourth quarter and could actually outscore their opponents this year in the fourth quarter? Sure, it could happen, but it didn't happen last year. So unless I'm just wishfully thinking, then I can't assume that's going to happen this year. Now, something that scares me, so looking at both these cons here, their defense and their fourth quarter, I wonder if this is an effort thing, a conditioning thing, an age thing. I don't know. But it's starting to scare me that their defense is bad. And listen, unless I'm so wildly out of date on how defense works, I would say roughly 65 to 75% of defense is pure effort. Now, obviously, you need a lot of athleticism, and age does factor. So we'll say 60% of defense is pure effort on that end of the floor. And if their defense is lacking, then it could be because their effort is lacking. Now, it might not be, but it could be. And if you're the worst fourth quarter team in the NBA, then it could be your effort down the stretch of games is waning a little bit. Your conditioning down the stretch is waning a little bit. Now, this is all speculatory. Of course, it may not be true at all. And also, quite frankly, I'm probably the last person that should be talking about anybody's conditioning, because look at me. You can't see me from here on down, and there's a reason for that. It ain't fun, folks. But looking at just the totality of it, it's hard to not make that argument. at this point. I hope it, I doubt that it's literally an effort thing, but at the same time, it could be a conditioning thing or an age thing, or it could just be a coincidence. We'll see. But regardless, the numbers say they were the worst fourth quarter team in the NBA last year, and they didn't really make many changes this year. So it could happen again, and that scares me. All right, the last con for the Phoenix Suns is going to be their financial flexibility, or should I say lack thereof. They have no financial flexibility. I mentioned earlier on in the video that they are in the second apron. They are one of only 7 of the NBA teams to be in the second apron. Now, what does that mean? It means a whole lot of different things, but for the most part, what it means is that they are strapped in terms of what kind of moves that they can make, who they can sign, who they can and cannot trade for. So I'll give you a few examples. Number 1, if you are in the second apron, you cannot add on salary beyond veteran minimum contracts. That's why I said earlier they were very, very lucky to get Tyus Jones, because they signed him to a minimum contract. If he did not sign, if he was not willing to sign for a minimum contract, he would not have gone anywhere. So that's an unfortunate kind of side effect of this second apron. You can't sign, you have no mid-level exceptions, you don't have anything like that. So you cannot bring in any outside help that's beyond a veteran minimum. So you're limited in terms of the kinds of talent you can bring in. You cannot trade for a player, I should say, for cash. So you cannot send cash out with any of your trades in order to get a player. So, it's not like they can do that. You also cannot trade for a player to add on salary if you just send out draft picks. It has to be a player for a player, and the salaries have to match, or the other team has to be willing to take on more salary in order to make the trade work. You cannot have it where you take on more salary than you already have in a trade, regardless of what you send out. So you can't trade cash, you can't trade draft pick for player, and lastly, you cannot sign a player who was bought out for more than $12 million. That is a rule that I think was implemented a couple of years ago. PJ Tucker was one that everybody was kind of looking at because I think his salary was like $11.4 million. And so he was just underneath the threshold. And they ended up not buying him out, and he played the rest of the year on the Clippers. So regardless of that, I think that the Phoenix Suns right now, with all of those kind of straps that they have financially, they are very limited in terms of who they can and can't bring in. So if they start to struggle this year, the only thing that they can do is trade away guys. They can't trade for guys unless they give stuff up. Now, there's a few reasons for that. Obviously, the big contracts of Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, Devin Booker, they speak for themselves. That's already there. However, they also are paying a good amount of guys, some reasonably big contracts. I don't know exactly how much they're paying Nurkic, but I assume he's getting paid somewhere in the $18 to $20 million range. It might be slightly less than that, but I assume it's somewhere in that range. They also paid Nasir Little $7 million per year for I think 3 or 4 years. It was something like that. I think it was 4-year, $28 million, if I remember correctly. I think that's what they signed him for last offseason, and they just released him. So that means that they have to pay him $7 million a year for the next 3 years to not be on their team. So that's unfortunate when you are in the second apron, because usually that multiplies. That tax just continues to be paid, and they're going to end up paying somewhere in the range of, $20, $25 million a year for a guy that now does not play for your team, if you include what you have to pay the NBA in tax and all that stuff for being in the second apron. So that's kind of unfortunate that they had to do that. I don't know why they released Nasir Little, if he was hurt or if he asked to be released or whatever the case may be. I know that I think it was today or yesterday he signed with the Miami Heat. So he'll be on the Heat this year. We'll see if that works out for either party. But all of this to say, if the Phoenix Suns are, the 6th seed like they were last year and we're around the trade deadline, the Phoenix Suns can't do anything. They cannot add. They cannot do anything. They can only subtract, basically. unless they find somebody who somehow was on a vet minimum and got released, and they pick him up, and maybe he's a guy that can come off the bench and do a little bit well for them. But they're not trading for any other stars. They're not kind of getting anybody that's going to be making $10 to $12 million a year. You're not going to find any Derek Whites rolling around, in terms of being traded away for draft picks like the Celtics did a few years ago. They are just going to have to rely on veteran minimums to come in and kind of do their work for them, and then hope that a guy like Ryan Dunn kind of can step up and be great for them despite his draft kind of slot there. So we'll see how it goes, but those are the 3 cons. So let me see. What do I diagnose them with? Alrighty, folks. So I have crunched the numbers. I've looked over everything, and here is my prediction for the Phoenix Suns this year. I think the Phoenix Suns will win 45 games. I think the Phoenix Suns will be the 7th seed in the West. I think that they will win the play-in tournament, and I think that they will be eliminated in the first round of the playoffs for the 2nd year in a row by this year's number 2 seed in the West, the Minnesota Timberwolves. And I think that after this year, the Phoenix Suns should rebuild. I know. It's something that I don't really want to say because I think that they have an opportunity to be great. But unfortunately, I just don't think it's going to happen. And I think if you have another year with this core that it does not work, you get eliminated in the first round, I think KD's got to go. I think Bradley Beal's got to go. You try and redo it again with Devin Booker because he's your franchise guy. You start over next year, and you go from there. But what do you guys think? Do you guys think that the Phoenix Suns should rebuild? Do you think that they should retool? Or do you think that they should reload and just run it back regardless of what happens this year? Do you agree with my assessment as to where they're going to end in a very, very crowded Western Conference now? That's one of my main reasons. The Western Conference is very crowded, so let me know what you guys think down in the comments section below. But guess what, guys? That's going to do it for this week's episode of the Lopes Goes Last podcast. Just 2 segments this week, so hopefully you guys enjoyed. But regardless, like, share, and subscribe if you enjoyed it. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.